Hey, everybody. Tim Graham here with just a quick announcement before this episode of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. An update. Within about 3 minutes of us concluding this podcast, the Bills traded defensive end Bam Johnson to the Carolina Panthers for a 6th-round pick. So my apologies that you will have some defensive line analysis that includes Johnson as still a potential member of this team, but you will hear Matthew Fairburn of The Athletic discuss trades may be necessary. So please keep that in mind when you get to that portion of the podcast. Hope you enjoy it.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein, New Bronstein Times, and Matthew Fairburn. He covers the Bills for The Athletic. And football season is here. And it's not just preseason, because we can talk about college football. Those real games have begun. And we'll talk a little bit later in the show about the University at Buffalo opening its season Thursday night at home. So it's right here, even though we have to wait a little extra than we normally do for the NFL regular season to begin. 2 weeks now in between the last preseason game and the season opener. It's also roster cut down week, and some of the cuts are trickling out. They haven't been big yet, but the deadline is Tuesday. Wanted to talk to you guys about just a couple of positions that we need to highlight, I think. And I'll keep offense all together. So let's start on defense. Defensive end, or defensive line, I should say, not just defensive end, but defensive line. Matthew, I know that you and Joe Biscaglia at The Athletic have been poring over your roster projections and whether or not your thoughts have changed too much since Saturday. I'm guessing they haven't. We haven't learned too much. There weren't any major injuries or anything. But where do you see this Bills defensive front shaking out when it comes to the depth chart?
I think it's probably the most complicated position on the roster that they have to figure out. That most of the summer, the roster projection wasn't too much of a puzzle like it was, a few years ago when they had so many new pieces and you were trying to figure out, who would make the team. They brought such a good core back that, there was a handful of spots up for grabs, but I think the biggest, trickiest position for them is defensive line, because kind of like the offensive line a few years ago, you remember when the summer they traded Wyatt Teller, when they just threw a lot at the wall to see what would stick. And then, they had some assets to trade around cut down time. This feels very similar. Like, I think they have 12 defensive linemen that they could keep, but that's a lot of defensive linemen to keep on a roster. I mean, that is, a fifth of your team, basically. So they might be in a spot where they can make a trade. They also have some, minor complications that could pop up in terms of the numbers game. I'd say Jerry Hughes, Mario Addison, Greg Rousseau, Boogie Basham, AJ Epinesa are all safe at defensive end. That's 5. You have Star Latulele, Vernon Butler, Harrison Phillips, Justin Zimmer, Ed Oliver gets you to 10. And then F.A. Obata and Darryl Johnson, those are the 12 that were kind of lumped in there. You've got Harrison Phillips is injured. So they'd probably like to keep him on the 53 and then move him to injured reserve. But you have to keep him on that initial 53 to get him onto short-term injured reserve. You have at least two defensive
And that means
tackles.
you'd have to expose somebody that you want to keep.
Right. You'll have to cut maybe one of those cornerbacks or cut a quarterback if maybe they want three. I don't envision that being the scenario, but they'll have to make it work somewhere else. But you've got at least two defensive tackles who are unvaccinated in Star Latulippe and Vernon Butler because they were pulled out of practice last week. So maybe you want extra depth to account for those guys. I don't think they're cutting Jerry Hughes or Mario Addison. They're not going to cut anybody that they drafted in the top 2 rounds in the last 2 years, which would include Rousseau, Basham, and Epinesa. So I think Obata and Darryl Johnson are the two that stand out. Obata had a great summer. He was great in practice. He looked great in preseason games. Maybe they can work on a trade there and get a draft pick for this guy. Maybe they could do the same for Darryl Johnson, who's one of their special teams aces and really answered the call. Like entering the summer, I thought there was no way this guy could make it just because of a numbers game, but he played well enough to make some team. So, maybe there's a trade to be had there. I just find it to be the toughest position to call because they're not going to simply cut down to a number. I don't think. I think they're going to find a way to get something for one of these players, and they just have to make sure they pick the right one.
Where are we with versatility, though? Some flexibility that can be had, guys who can maybe play some defensive end and move inside. Now, of course, that's hard to do. They don't have a lot of that flexibility, but how does that play in, I think, to the projection?
Yeah, they have a little bit of that. That's part of why I think getting rid of F.A. Obata is such a hard call, because you can trim at defensive tackle, keep Obata, and you have depth at defensive tackle with a guy who can play both spots. Boogie Basham can do it as well, but he really had a tough time staying at the top of the depth chart throughout the summer. I don't see him as a guy that they want in there for a ton of snaps early on in his rookie season, at least given the way that they kind of kept him a little bit buried throughout the preseason and training camp. Epinesa can do it a little bit, but not enough that you're super comfortable with it after the way that he's kind of trimmed down. Just not probably the ideal role for him. Rousseau could do it a little bit, but not a great spot for him. Addison can do it. And with so many of the guys that can do it, and with the NFL being such a passing league, you do wonder how many defensive tackles do they need to keep? Justin Zimmer has played so well in the summer. Do you need to keep Justin Zimmer? But the problem that they're running into, I think, at defensive tackle, when initially I would have thought, hey, keep 3 of them and load up on these defensive ends who can move all over the place, get creative with, different, substitution packages. Like I mentioned, Latulippe and Butler being unvaccinated and Harrison Phillips being injured, I think both make it a little bit complicated. You need a little bit more depth there because of things that can pop up.
It's interesting to see how even the Packers handled their defensive tackles heading into the game on Saturday. I believe they had only 4, maybe there was a 5th, but only 4 or 5 on their entire team with cuts still to go. And 2 of them were in the game, and guys who are considered maybe fringe players to make that roster. We're talking about rookies. One of them was a 5th round pick. I think the other one was undrafted. But you're right. In this passing league, those defensive tackles, you need them when you need them. You need them in goal line situations. You need them on 3rd and inches. You need them here and there. Obviously, the Bills need guys up front who can stop the run. We saw it time and again last season. If you're worried about anything, that's at the top of the list. But yeah, how much money can you spend? How much roster space can you dedicate to a position that we all know is geared to stop something that the NFL doesn't do anymore?
Yeah, it's part of the way they've built this defensive line too. We saw in a couple of preseason games certain looks where they had 4 guys who are technically listed as defensive ends on the field. And that's because Basham and Obata can play defensive tackle and rush the passer well from that spot. And I don't know how all in they want to go on that. They have to keep Starr because of his contract. They're locked into that. Outside of that, they could save a little bit of money cutting Vernon Butler. And, who knows, maybe they would. But with Harrison Phillips getting injured, he seemed to play his way onto the roster. He was the guy entering camp I thought could be that surprise cut, that name that people weren't expecting. Still possible, but he's injured. So I think, the way he was playing before he got injured will help him out. And it might save Vernon Butler's job. Justin Zimmer, they seem to love, played well in practices, the whole thing. I'm curious about him.
He was on the field awful late on Saturday.
He sure was. He was on the field at the very end of the game, but part of it was numbers, right? Harrison Phillips being hurt and, same as, with the Packers only having a few, it's like somebody's got to play. But I do wonder about him, as much as they like him, as positively as they've spoken about him. He bounced around the league for a while before finding his way back to Buffalo. And, he's earned his way here, but with such a deep defensive line room, you wonder if he needs to be on your team.
He's also maybe earned his waiver, because like you say, and you make a great reference there. He's been around. People, if you really wanted Justin Zimmer, you could have had him by now. And yes, maybe he's put some things on tape, but you guys, a guy who's got mileage like that, I think maybe Brandon Beane can say, I think he's going to slide through waivers and we can bring him back, and we're not going to have to risk losing this guy.
Right, bring him back after you put Harrison Phillips on injured reserve, if that's the way you want to do it. And if you
Jonah, you were going to say, I'm sorry, I didn't want to get too far away before you were going to mention.
Well, I wanted to ask Matt his thoughts on the logic of maybe cutting or trading Mario Addison, and even Jerry Hughes in this context of they're older players, and do you prioritize a younger prospect when you're deciding who to move on from and who to keep?
I think it's possible. Jerry Hughes, I think, is safe. He's still their best pass rusher, but I don't think he's as, he used to be by far their best pass rusher even 6 months ago, the last time they stepped on the field. I don't think it's as dramatic right now. Addison, I do think there's more of a case for moving on from him. He restructured his contract and, helped the team out a little bit there. So he's entering the final year of his deal anyways, but I'm not sure that they totally expected Greg Rousseau to be as good as he was during the summer. It wouldn't have been sound roster planning to bank on that guy being as good as he was in camp in the preseason, especially after he didn't play last year. And so him being so good, that's where you could look at Obata, or you could look at, Mario Addison and say, you know what, as much as we wanted you to show this guy the way, he seems to have a pretty good grasp of it. Right now on his own. Same with Epinesa for finding a way to, that might solve one of their numbers problems and, free up a little bit of money for them.
Let's flip over to the offensive side and touch on what's always a sexy discussion, quarterback. Obviously, nothing to worry about with the starter. He's MVP candidate and looked really good, even though he was against the Packers junior varsity on Saturday. So I think Bills fans can be happy that Josh Allen got into a rhythm, went through all those things that Sean McDermott likes to talk about, getting dressed before the game, which is a skill, apparently, something you got to practice, going out there for warm-ups, getting mentally ready for a game, working the play clock, timeouts, running the huddle, getting the play call from Brian Dable in the headset and executing plays and getting into a rhythm. I'll just keep using that phrase again. Mitchell Trubisky's interesting. There's still a lot of fans out there that would like to trade him for some kind of asset because, hell, everybody thinks Josh Allen's just going to take every snap. But also what's happening at the third spot, if there is a third spot, and who it should be in the event that there is a third quarterback kept on the roster. So I disagree, obviously, with Mitchell Trubisky. My laughter may have suggested Keep him. He's a hell of an insurance policy for a quarterback who runs and who has missed time here and there because of an injury or even coming out of a game. Sean McDermott is pretty, I don't know that I've ever noticed that before. I'm guessing Sean McDermott's not the first coach to do it, but sending Mitchell Trubisky out on the field for a play in the third quarter, I'd never noticed that before, but that really speaks to how much he wants to prepare of just turning and saying, Mitchell, get in there. Because that's how it works with a backup quarterback. Make sure that the guy's paying attention, get out there, run a play within the play clock, all that stuff. Anyways, I'm
It
rambling.
doesn't make you roll your eyes a little bit though that like that's gotten so much attention and everybody's like saying, "Oh, you're so smart for doing that."
Well, hey, look, there are coaches, and McDermott's one of them, who practice the national anthem. Like, how are we going to line up during the national anthem? How are we going to do our warm up? How we're going to line up when we do drills and all this stuff. They practice so that way it's one less thing to have to think about on game day. So, yes, does it make me roll my eyes? Sure, it's overkill. Practicing victory formation, probably overkill, but it doesn't waste any time. It didn't waste anything. So
yeah, I don't have a problem with them doing it. I think it's 12 or 15 beat writers doing a analysis of why they did it that made me roll my eyes.
well, okay, well, I'll give you that. But and I guess in their defense, if there is a defense, but in their defense, we didn't have a lot to write about after the game or in terms of our material. We all got the same guys after the game because of COVID restrictions and things like that. We got 5 guys? Only one of them was a defensive player.
I wish we got 5 guys for
I have a
the
take
press
on
box meal, but we only got 5 guys. But yes, we
Right.
got the 5 same guys.
That's a good one.
We got McDermott, we got Allen, we got a running back, a receiver, and a safety. And we all and Zach
did get
Moss spoke
Fromm.
for
We got Jake.
and
Fromm,
Jake
don't
Fromm.
forget
Jake
him.
Fromm. That's right. So 6. We got Zach Moss because we ran out of questions, spoke for 2.5 or 3 minutes. It was hard to actually interview Josh Allen because Micah Hyde's sitting right there and he's getting questions and it's going back and forth. So it's hard to actually get a flow or to get some, get some anecdotes and things like that. Deion Dawkins and Emmanuel Sanders on the stage together makes it hard. So I think that trying to cover a
It's like the
game
NBA.
and you got 2 weeks until the next game, till the regular season game. I think, there are writers who are like, well, we have to write about this because it's the material we have.
Right. It's everybody writing the same thing. So you guys are all in the same room, writing the same story, getting the same quotes. And, as you say, it didn't go as smoothly as you wanted it to. And then Buffalo, Bennett Grad, Isaiah McDuffie's in the opposite press room and nobody's in there. Nobody cared. Everybody had to write about Mitchell Trubisky's one snap and all that kind of stuff. And
so we can have this discussion because I was thinking about this earlier today. At The Athletic, obviously we get to look at our analytics somewhat. We get to have an idea of what people are reading, what people care about. Had I written a story about Isaiah McKenzie, even though I have a lot of Buffalo readers, it would have proven to be probably a waste of time.
Isaiah McDuffie.
Isaiah McDuff.
perhaps.
Not
I
Isaiah.
guess. Yeah, okay, go on.
So so I understand. So if you're the Buffalo News, you should do an Isaiah McDuffie story because that's what you're supposed to do. But I'll bet you their analytics are really similar in that
Sure. But
people will read the Mitchell Trubisky story 10 times more often than they'll read the Isaiah McDuffie story. And it's the same reason why, the Buffalo News is cutting back on its high school coverage and has been and continues to do so. It's because it doesn't bring in the clicks.
Sure. That's a much longer discussion about whether we should all be slaves to the analytic and the clicks, and the analytic measures change all the time. And there's different schools of thought as to what analytics you should be looking at and what really is important and what drives subscriptions and what drives readership and trust from your readership. And there's a lot of things that should be covered that don't get a lot of clicks, especially outside of sports with local government and things like that. I think when you're talking about the third preseason game, when there weren't a lot of intriguing Bill storylines, a local player coming, starting the game, playing as well as he did with 40 plus family members in attendance. And there's a lot you can tell about his family, that whole story. He's got a lot of his father and uncles and a cousin that currently plays for UB I think, and I don't really expect you at The Athletic to be in there writing that story, but I was pretty surprised that there weren't any other local reporters in there trying to talk to him. And I know some people mentioned it and did their stories, but I'm just saying, if you guys were getting squeezed out and don't think you got what you wanted out of the press room over on the Bills side, I mean, you know, Isaiah McDuffie was standing up there waiting for more questions. There weren't enough reporters in there. There was only one traveling writer from Green Bay and I think a broadcast reporter in there with me. And, you know, that was about it.
Well, I'll be honest. If I were to ask Isaiah McDuffie a question on Saturday, it would have been, what was it like to get lit up by Josh Allen?
Well,
More so than what's it like to come back here and play?
Josh Allen story that nobody else has.
That's right. That's true.
And somebody did ask him about that. He had a quote on playing Josh Allen.
Right. Well, no,
I think the angle there, I think, would have been all these family members in attendance. There would be an opportunity to tell a cool story about what it's like to be a 6th round pick on the bubble in your hometown. Like, your final audition also gets to come in your home stadium. It would have required more prep work probably than just jumping into the press conference after the game. But yeah, unfortunately, more people would care about Mitchell Trubisky probably. But ironically, a guy we mentioned earlier in the show, Justin Zimmer, I did a sort of a story like that, you know, hung out with his mom and dad, and maybe we were in Chicago, wherever we were, and, you know, in preparation for his final preseason game with the Bills that year being in Detroit, his hometown, and he had this huge crew of people there cheering him on. Like, yeah, those are, you know, it's interesting angles and interesting content. It's part of, I think, too, a lot of people trying to figure out what the hell everything is going to look like after games, right? That was
my deal. That was my first game since the playoff in Houston. That's the first game I've attended. I didn't attend any of the games last year because there was no locker room access. There was no point. So yeah, for me, it was, all right, what's it going to be like? I do have some strategies that I will deploy, but I needed to at least see. And the other thing too that makes it tough, if you're a reporter, when they're bringing select people into that room, into the news conference room, you're stuck there. You can't go look for some other things or poke your head into the Packers room, which is totally at the opposite end of the tunnel. You're stuck there, and you don't know when Sean McDermott's coming in or who even is going to come in next. You don't know what the list is going to be, and yeah, it's tough. So no, I get your point, Jonah. I have my thoughts that I don't want to share on here, because I have some ideas of how I'm going to cover games, and I don't want to tell everybody. But fair, all fair.
I thought the crowd was a big story the other day. First big crowd of the year. You know, I guess we could talk more about vaccination levels when we get to talking about Bills players, but what was the vaccination rate of the crowd on Kids Day, with a lot of kids that aren't even eligible to get vaccinated, and whether that was an issue or not, mask wearing and bringing, I mean, has there been 50, 60,000 people together in one place anywhere in Western New York in the last year and a half?
You know, I was thinking about that, especially I'm on the field before the game doing the pregame show for Channel 4 and seeing what has become a popular trend, and it's really cool. I like it, but seeing players that go around the lower ring and play catch with the fans, throwing a football in there, throwing it back. Now I don't know the science on whether or not the virus can survive on a Duke Wilson football while it's traveling.
It can survive
3 miles
on every
an hour
other
through
football,
the air,
but not a Duke.
In the 90-degree heat. What's that? It's not the NFL football, isn't a Duke, or it is?
No, I'm saying it can survive on every other football,
but not on a Duke. I see. Yes, and then all right, so it's not as though the football's dripping with DNA or what have you. But how about this? After the game, watching these players fight to peel off their gloves that are soaked in sweat. They've been like wiping their schnoz or whatever blood they got, you know, that they're getting, whatever. and tossing them right in there. And these kids, catching them with their, because they, catching them with their face, some of them. They're just guys slinging towels, slinging hats, slinging whatever up into the stands.
And there's no game day testing, correct?
That's right.
And it was the
And
first.
some of these kids are unvaccinated. You're right. And it's kids because the default setting is as your parent, maybe you're not even thinking of it. Let's go down to the tunnel.
Right.
Let's see if we can interact with these players. They can get a high five or, tell so-and-so that you think he's the greatest.
Kids are
And,
gross. They have their hands in their mouth all the time. And
there was a guy who had a cheese head, and he kept throwing the cheese head into the tunnel at Packers players before the game in hopes that they would sign it and throw it back. So is this guy wearing this cheese head and he's throwing it at the players and then they pick it up? They all picked it up and threw it back, or most of them did. Not, I don't know if any of them signed it, but yeah, I mean, yeah.
It was the first time in a while that I've actually been, because since the vaccine, since I've been vaccinated and, things had opened up in the summer, it was pretty easy to get back to normal. I thought, I wondered whether I'd be still a little skittish after so much time, practicing social distancing and everything. But in the tunnel after the game, I was with the variant going around and everything, I was maybe I ought to toss this mask on here, even though we're outside, because there's a lot of people coming through there at once, knowing the vaccination rates.
Huffing and puffing. That's the other, breathing heavy.
Yeah, it's a lot of, guys tossing stuff, guys, whatever restrictions the NFL has in place, the lines are being blurred a little bit when it comes to fan interaction, guys interacting with one another a little bit more, entering into a very weird in between season, I think, for the NFL, where, as far as protocols and, what all is going on, at least last year, it was very cut and dry. Everybody had the same rules. Everybody was in the same boat. Now it's a little bit different. And, I thought being down in there in the mix for the first time in a while, it was oh yeah, this is still a thing. And a lot of, there's a lot of people treating it like it's not. And, it is what it is at this point.
Well, it's an opportunity for us to merge our two topics that we've had here so far that we've kind of rolled through here. We were talking about cuts earlier, and we got the quarterback, and we didn't really make it all the way through. We turned into a journalism discussion that turned into a COVID discussion. Let's get back to the cuts and the COVID discussion. What's going to happen at wide receiver? And should vaccinations, regardless of whether Sean McDermott refuses to acknowledge that it could be an issue in terms of cuts or who to keep or whether or not you have to keep extra. Sean McDermott repeatedly said at the news conference last week before the game that vaccinations will not play a role in the team's decision to cut somebody.
He might.
I don't know that I believe
directly to saying, lawyers, are you listening?
Right.
So
where do you think things stand at the with wide receivers, which is deep to begin with, and then even without the COVID aspect of it, it's deep and there are tough decisions to be made.
Yeah, and I believe him when he says the decisions won't be made based on vaccination status, and I think it's a somewhat easy thing to say because they're not going to cut Gabriel Davis or Cole Beasley. Those are important players on their wide receiver depth chart. They're favorite targets of Josh Allen. We saw Isaiah McKenzie after, needling the league a little bit, decided to get vaccinated. He had played his way onto the roster anyways, but, I'm sure they were happy to see that. I think it impacts the roster more from how deep you need to build it, more so than, oh, we're going to cut this guy because he's not vaccinated. That very well may happen behind the scenes as a tiebreaker for what Brandon Beane said in his honest moment, right? Is
and it's not about punishing the player for not being vaccinated. It's the whole idea that we need to be able to count on you to not be sent home from the facility for 5 days.
Yeah, and you have a higher tolerance for dealing with that with a Cole Beasley or a Gabriel Davis than you do somebody at the bottom of the roster. You know, you need those guys available, ready to fill in for the Cole Beasleys and the Gabriel Davises when they get sent home, assuming they don't change their vaccination status at any point. So, yeah, I wonder if you look at, you know, we don't know exactly who is vaccinated and who is not. We've gotten bits and pieces of that information as those guys were pulled out of practice last week. But I think you have to consider the fact that you'd want, if you have a room like wide receiver where you don't have as many players vaccinated, you might want an extra body in there in case you need to throw somebody in. I mentioned it with defensive line earlier as well. Linebacker, we saw Matt Milano and AJ Klein get pulled out as a precaution last week by the team. So those feel like spots, without knowing the entire roster's vaccination status, those feel like spots where you would want maybe an extra player, or maybe when you build your practice squad, it's a little wide receiver, defensive tackle, and linebacker heavy because of some key players at those positions who have chosen not to get vaccinated. That's where I think it will all play in for them, more so than saying you're not vaccinated, you're gone. Because at this point, the holdouts on the vaccination, a good chunk of them, almost all of them, are guys who are going to make this team, or, you know, have a very good chance. Some of them have big roles on this team in 2021.
Well, it also fits well with a team that's probably going to play a lot of 10 personnel, 5 wide, and doesn't have great tight ends and really doesn't have much at fullback. It would be interesting if the Bills have to go in a game where they're very shorthanded at wide receiver for any reason, but let's say it's because of contact tracing and vaccination status and things like that. Can they shift to being a very run-heavy type of offense? You know, do they have the personnel to do that if they're very shorthanded at wide receiver, or for whatever reason can't play that spread out style that worked so well last year?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, they played more 10 personnel than every team other than the Arizona Cardinals last year. You add Emmanuel Sanders into the mix, having him, Gabriel Davis, Cole Beasley, and Stephon Diggs on the field at the same time obviously is a fun thing to think about for Bills fans. Throw Isaiah McKenzie into the mix and you can go 5 wide at times. But yeah, not only are injuries going to pop up, because that happens, but it has to be a frustrating component of this for the Bills, that what happened this week with Cole Beasley and Gabriel Davis could happen again and again and again until they decide to get vaccinated, or until the NFL changes those policies. So yeah, I think they keep 7 wide receivers. At least that's what I would do. And then have probably a couple, at least 2 on the practice squad. Even when you're a team that relies that much on your receivers, I think, you know, you want as many as possible. There's the top 5 of Diggs, Sanders, Beasley, Davis, and McKenzie. Jake Kumaro, I think, has earned a spot, and I'd keep Marquez Stevenson, you know, just because he put too much on tape in the preseason to risk letting it away. And then maybe you bring back Isaiah Hodgins on the practice squad, or, you know, I think Hodgins is probably your primary candidate there, but, you know, they signed Steven Sims last week. Maybe they can fit him on there somewhere. You might have to be deeper because of how you play and because of decisions that individuals have made in that position room. You just might have to account for that when you're stacking your board and choosing your 53.
Are any of these receivers in that category that Andre Roberts was in last year, where they could cut him and bring him back 2 days later?
Not the ones who would be in danger of getting cut. You know, I believe Kumaro would be still subject to waivers, and Stevenson, obviously, as a rookie, would still be subject to waivers. They have other players who they could do that with. They could do it with a Taiwan Jones, you know, a guy they like on special teams, if they wanted to bring him back. There's somebody who's slipping my mind on defense that they can do it with as well. Maybe one of their corners or defensive linemen. They do have a few players that they can do that with, which is a nice wrinkle to have when you're trying to get Harrison Phillips on injured reserve, where you just say, look, we're going to cut you, but we're going to bring you right back. Take one for the team here. They have some of those options, just not at receiver, I don't believe.
Related to the passing game, I saw a lot of angst from Bills fans. I guess I wouldn't say it's a high percentage of Bills fans, but when I say a lot, it's because there were just such a sheer volume of reactions based on watching Josh Allen play for the first time since last year's postseason and seeing him click so well within that offense. Past two games, of course, the Bills have not run the ball, which to be expected with Brian Daboll's offense. They didn't run until the 17th snap Saturday against Green Bay, and I think it was 2 runs on the first 21, 23 plays the week before at Chicago. But one thing I want to point out, if the Bills are going to run the ball more, which both Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane said was going to be a priority heading into the offseason and preparing for 2021, the preseason isn't when you do it. If the Bills have been cooking something up in terms of how they want to use their offense and how they're going to insert run plays, you're going to see it in 2 weeks against the Pittsburgh Steelers. You don't need to put plays or to give advanced scouts a reason to take a look at how you're going to use Matt Breida, whether or not you prefer Singletary, Moss, whatever, anything with your run game. I think the Bills game, the Bills,
Matt Breida, which could be if Isaiah McKenzie can't play, Matt Breida might, take that role.
Sure. Those are all NFL plays are timing plays, but that's a play that they might have wanted to get against a live defense. So yeah, maybe they're showing a little bit there. They want to see how that's going to look. Yeah, but I think that don't just assume that this is going to be the same Bills offense in terms of a play to play down and distance template that we've seen under Brian Daboll. I would expect some wrinkles. Any good team needs to come up with significant changes year to year to keep defenses guessing. So anyway, we were just talking about, spreading the ball out and Josh Allen, which is cool. If you're a Bills fan, to see him go to 5 different receivers on his first 5 throws and how he sprays the ball around. But we didn't see any design Josh Allen runs. We didn't. The fourth and 2 conversion might have been a designed run. I don't know.
Do you think we'll see less of that this year because of who Josh Allen is and his contract and trying to keep him healthy?
I think the Bills have wanted to do that less and less already, and then they unleash it when they really need it, postseason or a specific game where they think they can exploit it against the defense. But especially 2 seasons ago, they went that long stretch where Josh Allen was running maybe 4 or 5 times a game as opposed to 10 or 12. They really tapped the brakes on him. And yeah, so as he gets older, I think that's the case. Things accumulate.
He mentioned something when we spoke last week for a story I'm working on, that he expects teams to play a lot more zone against them. And I think as that happens, you might see fewer runs just because man coverage, when teams play heavy man coverage, you end up with guys with their backs turned to the quarterback and big chunks of yards are sitting out there. I think it's interesting that he has that awareness that they're going to see more zone. And so you're going to see a lot of what you saw in that preseason game. Obviously, he won't be going against Green Bay's junior varsity, but a lot of let's sit back and make this guy take short throw after short throw after short throw and hope that he does what he did against the Titans last year, gets a little frustrated and tries to force one in because he gets impatient. Josh Allen's kind of mentally preparing for that already, knowing that was a problem he had last year. And we've seen before when he has those, like 2019 against the Patriots, when he has those games that stand out as bad games, like his worst game, he does really internalize it and try to overcorrect. And against the Patriots, it was the just throwing up dangerous throws. And against the Titans last year, it was just not having enough patience to go down the field. So the fact that he's showing a little bit of that, I wouldn't expect him to run in the preseason anyways. But that is a way to combat running a lot too, is when you're like, all right, let's just hit these short throws, get the easy completions, and have the patience and the maturity to frustrate a defense that way, because the big plays will end up being there at some point, like they were with Gabriel Davis. When it's there, take it. But if it's not, don't try to get it all at once. That seems to be an emphasis for him.
Before we go, I want to bring up Thursday night, 7:00. UB opens its season against Wagner, which probably will look similar to Green Bay's defense that it put on the field Saturday. Wagner played 2 games last year, 2 whole games. They lost by a combined score of 43-7. They're going to open up against a UB team that should contend for a Mid-American Conference division title. Jonah, it's not quite Bishop Sycamore that they're going to be playing on Thursday, but and we'll talk more about UB later in the week on an upcoming podcast. But any general thoughts on UB and the fact that its season opener is just a couple days away?
Yeah, well, football-wise, I mean, it is probably going to be a bit like a preseason game. As you mentioned with Wagner, they're not a good team to begin with, and coming off a season where they didn't play very much. UB's favored by 48.5 points, I think I saw on one line. And even with some new pieces and a new coaching staff and a lot of changes on that, in the UB huddle, I don't think you're going to see them struggle too much in this first game. You're probably going to see the second and third stringers playing a lot in the second half. But in the past years, with past coaches in their first year, UB has struggled in this game against the FCS team early in the season. And sometimes that can be an indicator. They're probably going to win the game, but if they don't win the game going away, that could be something to be concerned about going forward. I think it is going to be a lopsided game. And similar to what I mentioned with the Bills game, it is going to be the first time fans are back in the stands at UB in 2 years. They had this great season last year that the fans had to participate in from afar.
Well, this is a stadium, to be frank, this is a stadium that even 2 years ago is socially distanced from the field. Right. This is the most socially distanced stadium in sports. Right.
But what I mean is that, there was no fan support from the students or the community. They weren't allowed in the building last year. And now you have a different coach and some players have left, but a lot of the same players coming back. I'm curious to see how much of a kind of celebration of the program we'll see at this first game, because the first game isn't always the best game competitively, but it's often the biggest crowd of the year and one of the bigger and feeling like a UB game is an event, even if it's not a marquee opponent. And then the next week they go and play Nebraska, which isn't one of the best Power 5 teams in the country, but is a Power 5 team. And UB probably needs to get into a good rhythm going into that week.
And big tradition, the whole thing. Nebraska still has a gravitas to it, even though it's been awful for the past.
Yeah, I mean, that's a meaningful game for UB, whether Nebraska's the program that they used to be or not. It would have been very intriguing if Lance Leipold was still the coach, and you could be saying, he wins that game, and all of a sudden he's, on the short list to be the new Nebraska coach. Now that's not on the table. And the big thing with UB is Mo Linguist and his first game as the coach and the enthusiasm he's injected into the program. They had a big pep rally with the students last night, and he's very fan friendly and very out in the open and talkative. And I think that even if there is a drop off in how the team plays on the field, I think they have an ability to still connect with the fans and be an exciting team to watch in different ways than they were last season.
All right. Well, that's 7:00 Thursday night over at UB Stadium. I guess the other date and time that I should reference just for the sake of this podcast and those who may be wondering, 4 p.m. Eastern time, Tuesday, is roster cut down time for the NFL. Everybody's got to get down to 53, and we'll see how that sorts itself out for the Buffalo Bills.
Also, maybe we should mention high school football comes back this weekend. And they did play last spring, but you could only have parents in attendance. It wasn't really the same pageantry and having students and friends and family at the games, and it wasn't in the fall. But also with, kids under 12 can't get vaccinated. I think I looked up yesterday that kids 12 to 18 are only 40% vaccinated, things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how high schools in general play out at this stage in the pandemic, and whether high school sports contribute to that or not. There was a lot of talk a year ago about whether high school sports and college sports and professional sports should be played. Now everything's being played, and I'm curious to see how much of an issue the pandemic's still going to be at the high school level.
Thanks again for listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I am Tim Graham of The Athletic, and for Jonah Bronstein of the New Bronstein Times and Matthew Fairburn, also of The Athletic, thank you for listening.
CTBK is more than just a full-service accounting firm. They are one team with an innovative approach to accounting and rise to each new challenge with collaborative problem-solving skills. CTBK goes above and beyond by lending helping hands in the Buffalo and Niagara community through volunteer work and donations, and is partnered up with Victory Sports for 2020 and 2021 to keep kids in the community active. The professionals at CTBK are determined to help individuals and businesses succeed. Whether a large corporation, a small business, or somewhere in between, call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400, and see what CTBK's one-team approach can do for you.
Thank you.